Chris Harman, How Marxism Works. Section: Why Crises Tend to Get Worse. Crises do not just take place with monotonous regularity. Marx also predicted they would get worse as time went on. Even if investment took place at an even rate, without fits and starts, it could not stop the overall trend towards crisis. This is because the competition between capitalists and capitalist nations forces them to invest in labor-saving equipment. In Britain today, almost all new investments are designed to cut the number of workers employed. That is why there are fewer workers in British industry today than 10 years ago, even though the output has increased over that time. Only by, quote, rationalizing production, by increasing productivity, and by cutting the workforce, can one capitalist get a bigger share of the cake than another. But the result for the system as a whole is devastating. For it means that the number of workers does not increase at anything like the same speed as investment. Yet it is the labor of workers that is the source of the profits, the fuel that keeps the system going. If you make bigger and bigger investments without a corresponding increase in the source of profits, you are heading for a breakdown, just as surely as if you expected to drive a Jaguar on the amount of petrol needed to keep a Mini going. That is why Marx argued 100 years ago that the very success of capitalism in piling up huge investments in new equipment led to a, quote, tendency of the rate of the profit to decline, which means ever worsening crises. His argument today can be applied very simply to capitalism. Instead of the old picture of bad times turning into good times, of slumps turning into booms, we seem to be in a never-ending slump. Any spell of upturn, any drop in unemployment is limited and short-lived. Apologists for the system say this is because investment is not high enough. Without new investment, there are no new jobs. Without new jobs, there's no money to buy new goods. So far, we can agree with them, but we don't agree with their explanation of why this is happening. They blame wages. Wages are too high, they say, which cuts profits to the bone. Capitalists are frightened to invest because they won't get, quote, sufficient reward. But the crisis has continued through long years in which government pay policies have cut workers' living standards and pushed profits up. The years 1975 to 78 saw the biggest cut in workers' living standards this century. While the rich grew richer, the top 10% pushed up their share of the national cake from 57.8% in 1974 to 60% in 1976. There still isn't enough investment to end the crisis. And that goes not just for Britain, but for other countries where wages have been cut back. For France, for Japan, for Germany. We would do better to listen to what Karl Marx said 100 years ago than to listen to those who apologize for capitalism today. Marx predicted that as capitalism got older, its crises would get worse because the source of profit, labor, does not increase nearly as rapidly as the investment needed to put labor to work. Marx wrote when the value of the plant and machinery needed to employ each worker was fairly low. It has shot up since then, until today it can be 20,000 or even 30,000 pounds. Competition between capitalist firms has forced them to use ever bigger and ever more expensive machinery. The point has been reached where, in most industries, it is taken for granted that new machinery means fewer workers. The International Economic Agency (OECD) has predicted that employment in the world's major economies will fall, even if by some miracle investment soars. Which it won't, because capitalists care about their profit, and if their investment increases fourfold, but their profit only doubles, they get really upset. Yet this is what must happen if industry grows more quickly than the source of profit, labor. As Marx put it, the rate of profit will tend to fall. He predicted that a point would eventually be reached at which any new investment would seem a perilous venture. The scale of expenditure needed for new plant and machinery would be colossal, but the rate of profit would be lower than ever before. When this point was reached, each capitalist, or capitalist state, would fantasize about huge new investment programs, but be afraid to make them for fear of going bust. The world economy today is very much like that. Rover plans new production lines, but fears it will lose money. British Steel dreams of those big plants it planned, but have to keep them on ice because it cannot sell its present output. The Japanese shipbuilders have given up investing in new yards, and some of the old ones are being shut down. The very success of capitalism in building ever vaster and more productive machinery has brought the system to the point of seemingly permanent crisis. A point was reached in the slave societies of the ancient world and the feudal societies of the Middle Ages, where either a revolution would transform society, or it would enter a permanent crisis that would drive it backwards. In the case of Rome, the lack of a revolution led precisely to the destruction of Roman civilization and to the Dark Ages. In the case of some feudal societies, Britain and later France, revolution destroyed the old order and enabled new social advance to take place under capitalism. Now, capitalism itself faces the choice between permanent crisis, which eventually will plunge humanity back into barbarism through poverty and war, or a socialist revolution. End of section.